Hello and welcome to Note Doctors. My name is Paul.
My name is Jenn.
And we are your hosts. We are all university music theory instructors who are passionate about music theory and music theory instruction. In this podcast, we will be talking about all things theory with some of the best music theory teachers in the country. If you want to know more about music theory and the most effective and innovative ways to teach it, this is the podcast for you. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Note Doctors, the music theory and pedagogy podcast. Thank you so much for joining us on this quite special occasion because this episode is a collaboration with the fine folks at the Journal of Music Theory Pedagogy. So what is the Journal of Music Theory Pedagogy? Well, it is the place to find the most up-to-date and innovative research done in the area of music theory pedagogy. And so a few months ago, we reached out to the folks there and thought about doing an episode or two where we featured authors of articles from their upcoming volume. So the latest volume, which will be coming out in the new year, we're going to be featuring one of the authors in this episode. So we want to thank the folks at JMTP, Steve Lates, Jenny Snodgrass, Rebecca Jemian, David Thurmeyer, all the folks on the editorial board for coming on board with this collaboration. And if you want to find out more about what the JMTP is all about, you can go to the website at jmtp.appstate.edu. It's totally free. You can research past issues. It's a wonderful, wonderful resource to get some new ideas and to find out what people are doing in the area of music theory pedagogy. So our guest today is Aaron Grant, and we're going to be talking to him about his upcoming paper in the JMTP called Cultivating Career Skills Through Public Music Theory and Community Engaged Learning. So Aaron Grant is, actually, I don't have my thing pulled up here. Ben, tell us a little bit more about Aaron Grant and where he comes from.
He's from Missouri Western State University. He is an assistant professor of music theory there, where he coordinates the music theory core sequence. His research engages issues of form, narrative, and meaning in 19th century music, particularly in the music of Franz Schubert and Louis Farrenc. In addition to his work on 19th century form, Aaron's pedagogical research focuses on connecting the music theory classroom to other disciplines and the public sphere. His work can be seen in the Journal of Music Theory Pedagogy, Engaging Students, 19th Century Music Review, and he has a forthcoming article in Music Theory Spectrum.
The kernel that keeps me going with these types of assignments is like, I think of myself as a listener, like what would undergrad me who didn't know what theory was, what would have made me excited to go to a concert? You know, like what would have made me excited to, or feel like I just learned more about the piece or heard the, I guess to use Lewin's term about analysis, like what would make me hear the piece differently, right? The whole point of a good analysis is to make us hear a piece differently. And I think that's something, especially my music ed students, like they really take to heart, or I try to instill in them is that like, it may seem like there's a lot of baggage with theory, but at its core, what we're trying to do is get people to hear things differently. And I think part of that is meeting people where they are, but of course that's extremely hard.
So today, our very special guest is Aaron Grant. We're so happy to have you on the podcast to talk with you about your paper and to be our first guest of, we hope, many that are from articles from the JMTP, and so as the Journal for Music Theory Pedagogy. And so if, as we're listening and Aaron's talking, you know, if you're interested in more of what he has to say and what he's done, you know, check out his article. It's going to be out in the beginning of the new year on the Journal of Music Theory Pedagogy website. And so we're thrilled to have you on to talk about public music theory, community engaged learning, and those types of things. But we always like to ask our guests, just kind of before we get into the meat of the conversation, just a little bit about, you know, how you got into music theory. I mean, was it overhearing your theory professors arguing over whether to label a chord a 1/6/4 or a 5/6/4 or a CAD 6/4, and you're like, I gotta find out what this is all about, you know? Or maybe it was something completely other than that.
I probably have like one of the weirder ways to get into music theory because it was a complete accident, and incredibly unintentional. I actually wanted to go to grad school for musicology. I went to undergrad at Penn State. They had a 5-year program where you could do a master's degree in your fourth and fifth year. Applied to musicology, got rejected. But then as I got rejected, it had like the rejection letter had this very strange sentence in it that said, "We do encourage you, however, to apply to the theory program." And I said, "What's theory?" But undergrad me also was like, well, I like master's degree. Might as well do what the nice rejection letter says. So I did, and ended up loving it. I mean, I think it was a matter of, at the time I had taken one graduate level analysis course at Penn State, and my teachers just kind of knew me and knew that really what I wanted to do was theory and not actually musicology. And so I think that was their subtle way of guiding me in my naive undergrad ways. So I have since thanked Maureen Carr for that, for doing that for me a while ago, because I mean, I wouldn't have done it otherwise. And it was definitely the right move.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. The first time I think we've heard someone say a rejection letter directing you into a different area. I mean, it was helpful, right? I mean, that's a helpful rejection letter.
I distinctly remember showing it to my wife and being like, I think this is them telling me to do something else, but maybe this is just my anxiety. Like,
when one door closes, another door opens, and that door just might be music theory. There you go.
Exactly.
That's great. So we are here to talk specifically about your paper that's titled, I have it right here, Cultivating Career Skills Through Public Music Theory and Community Engaged Learning. So give us a little, elevator pitch about what your article is kind of all about before we dive into it. Sure.
Really, I think this article kind of came about because of when I started teaching here. I did what I think a lot of people do, is I assigned final papers as part of my classes, and I found myself kind of being a little less than satisfied with the buy-in that I was getting from those research papers, because of course, like me, theorist is like, yes, research, this is going to be the best day ever. But it turns out that not all my undergrads feel that way, and so I was thinking to myself about like what are some of the different ways in which I can like get the same sorts or build the same sorts of skills that you get for the research paper, but in using other mediums. And at this time, while I was contemplating this, I think it was the original Ped into Practice, where it was around that time, and I know I remember talking to my good friend Amy Fleming, and we had just gotten to know Danny Jenkins's work on public music theory, and we were like, well, this has a ton of potential. Like, I know he's doing a grad class, but like, what if we just like did this all the time, or what if we did this in our undergrad classes? And so that was kind of the genesis of this for me, is just kind of being like, well, yeah, this kind of makes a lot of sense. Like I myself am a crazy podcast head, and was like, well, I would have as an undergrad would have loved to be able to make podcasts, or would have loved to be able to, do some research and be able to flex my creative skills in a way that felt more relevant, I guess. Mm-hmm. And then as that evolved, I kept again being a little bit dissatisfied with, okay, well, they made a podcast that feels kind of nice. I've done something good, but I felt like it was one step short of where it needed to be, because I'm like, well, they made it, but why aren't they like actually showing it to people? Why aren't we actually like engaging the community that I'm trying to work with? And so that's sort of the genesis of this entire thing, is just kind of like, and I mean, I think we all go through this as teachers. We try something, we realize, hey, I'm dissatisfied about this. I want to do, what are some of the ways I can fix it? Let me try it again another way. Then let me try it again another way. And it continues to evolve.
So your paper has like 5 kind of small, easy to input projects. That's the first part of it describes these 5 projects. Could you tell us more about those and kind of where those ideas came from?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think this is kind of like an offshoot of what we were just talking about, is that I came up with the idea of like, what if we wanted to train our students to actually like talk about theory to the public? Well, if we actually want to talk about theory to the public, it turns out this is really freaking hard. Like really hard. And so I began with the big project, actually, I think it's part 2 of my article. I talk about that. And I started there, but noticed that a lot of my students just kind of freaked out, like got the deer in headlights moment. And so next go around, I started trying to incorporate some smaller exercises throughout the semester to kind of get them ready for it. And again, I can't take full credit for all of these things. My friend Owen Belcher and I have had a bunch of conversations about how to do this, because he also is extremely interested. We have an article in Engaging Students about more of these kind of small scale ideas. So we did everything from like pre-concert lectures to program notes to teaching demos. I really like, in particular, the idea of having students translate pieces into kind of graphic analyses. The idea stemming from, I feel like I get all my ideas from my friends, so I apologize if I just like shout out a whole bunch of people. But like my friend Dan Ketter showed me one. He's a cellist and a theorist at Missouri State, and he showed me the Toronto Symphony Orchestra's graphic analyses at one point, and we collaborated actually to do one of our own for a concert that he was doing. And I thought, well, this is really fun. We should do this I should do this in my classes. It's fantastic. And we have since like traded assignments. And I think my students kind of enjoy, again, being able to take theory and apply it in ways that feel more real world. I feel like I could do this. I could do this and show my parents, and they actually know what I'm talking about.
I did that exact thing at a Dallas Symphony concert, where you had an app on your phone, and while you were listening to the concert, you had this app up, and it would show you a different kind of color scheme and different sections of the piece, and then what sections you were in. It would even have like a zoomed out view of the piece, and then you could zoom into a certain section. And then just a short description, not super technical, like you said, very relatable to a person who doesn't read music, a person who doesn't know, what a sonata form is, etc. And, following that, there were a lot of people that had it on around me. And I found it really useful, and I think it's something that, can be really rewarding for students to make for other people, make it more relatable to people they're talking to on campus and stuff.
Well, and also, I mean, like you said it as a listener, it makes a big difference for you. And so I think like that's kind of where like the kernel that keeps me going with these types of assignments is like, I think of myself as a listener, like what would undergrad me who didn't know what theory was kind of, or like when I was a freshman and I didn't know theory at all, like what would have made me excited to go to a concert? Like what would have made me excited or feel like I just learned more about the piece, or heard I guess to use Lewin's term about analysis, like what would make me hear the piece differently, right? The whole point of a good analysis is to make us hear a piece differently. And I think that's something, especially my music ed students, like they really take to heart, or I try to instill in them is that like, it may seem like there's a lot of baggage with theory, but at its core, what we're trying to do is get people to hear things differently. And I think part of that is meeting people where they are, but of course that's extremely hard.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, right. We're trying to get people to hear labels and see sounds. I mean, it's a really complicated thing we're asking for, actually, of our students. And I think too, we've all had that experience of like, somebody asks you what you do and you're like, oh no, I usually just say something like, I'm a music professor. And if they're like, oh, do you teach voice? I'm like, well, no.
No, it's
What do
what
you
play?
Something called
What do you
me. Yeah.
play?
What do you play? Or,
And
you know,
you say,
do
I-
you sing? Yeah. So, you know, and I've often said things like, oh, it's like being an English teacher where the first couple of semesters you teach grammar and syntax. And then later on, when students understand more, you teach literature and deeper cultural meanings and things like that. But you're still having to rely on other things. And a lot of times people are just like nicely nodding. So I love the idea of giving your students right out the gate the notion that music theory is applicable to things that they will be doing in their careers, and it's a valuable way for them to be able to explain their, you know, take what they know and give it to other people, which is something all musicians have to do in some way, shape, or form.
No, exactly. I mean, you in like one of the assignments that I did that I secretly like loved talking about this in the article because I got to mention the Great Trailer Park Musical, which is actually surprisingly good, but like a ridiculous name. I'm also I walked into that being like, okay, so that's what we're doing now. I am. That was my first year here, and I was like, so these are the types of musicals. Okay. As like a musical like head, I was like, okay, but it's actually really like it's actually pretty good. But I had my students write, you know, a pre-concert like announcement for that. Were they going to be putting this on themselves, or as a music educator, as a performer, or maybe just like publicizing this if you're a music tech person. Like, how would you get people excited beyond just being like, it's really good. I swear it's really good. Please come. It's really good. You know, and I think that's, again, like talking about the kind of career applicability. That's something that does matter.
Yeah, no, I remember like after I first went to see Frozen with my wife and Lucas, my 4-year-old son, I was trying to explain to her how Let the Storm Rage On. It was like really cool because it was like a flat 3, you know, and that's like modal mixture and all this. And I was like, oh, I'm already beyond, you know, like I'm already beyond like what she can like relate to. My wife doesn't read music. She's not a musician. She sings Happy Birthday. It's in like 3 different keys.
I sympathize with that. My wife's the same way on all 3 counts.
I have learned so much trying to explain just something like that to her, you know what I mean? And it just it forces you to like think back to what really makes something tick, what really, like, in most basic human terms, you know, what really makes a certain musical moment cool, you know, like you're saying, like, why is that tune cool, or why is this particular moment happening the way it does, like, and just describing those types of things so that people will be brought in and want to come into our kind of artistic world with us, you know what I mean?
No, totally. And I think it's one of those, like, once you start asking those questions, like, a lot of doors start to open. I remember, I think it might have been the very last Pet into Practice. Dan Stevens did a keynote, and he was talking about improvisation, and he brought out these Legos, and we got to do, like, everyone got some Legos, and you had to, like, make a little Lego figure first, and then you make a little piece. You improv a little piece based on these Legos. And I'm like, oh my God! Like, if you just like what he's really asking us to do is start to think about abstraction in a different way, and start to like link music to abstraction in a very, very creative way. And I think, like, to go back to kind of like the graphic analysis, like we used to do I think Dan did this, actually sent this to me at one point. He had his students doing graphic analyses of verse-chorus forms, and just kind of being like, how do we explain verse-chorus form in a general sort of way? Like, and it's really interesting to see what students kind of take and distill into a graphic. I do something kind of similar when I introduce binary forms, actually, where I'm like, if I told you there's a form that started like stable and then it like alternated like this stable section followed by like some unstable stuff, like I want you guys to like just imagine this exists, and then add some repeat signs, and I want you to like do this, but I want you to like come up with a piece that, were this the case, what would you do? And then they come and, you know, they basically recreating Danny's thing in a kind of a different way, and then introducing binary form like the actual phenomenon. They're like, oh, like I kind of get, like it helps them, I think, remember things a little bit better is when you kind of can take those, can take that distillation, and just kind of present it to them in a different way, or have them figure out their own distillation for themselves too, in this case.
Yeah, form is something that for us is often so clear, and then it's so baffling when you give a test and a student writes binary and you're like, but the idea came back. Like, it's just not possible. Were you listening? You know, and I think I love the idea of having them conceive of it first and then interacting with the music that's like that. And that's really good.
Yeah, because the music notation can sometimes be a problem just looking at it. You know, they can't look at a score and be like, oh, clearly that's a rounded binary. No, they're like just trying to figure out what the key signature is, right?
Yeah, well, exactly. And I don't know about your students, but especially like if there's a sequence in there, my students are like, oh my goodness, there's a sequence. I don't, well, actually, probably what they're saying is, oh my God, there's accidentals. And like...
Right. They don't even have that term there, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just because for at least where I put that sort of stuff in the curriculum, it's like I think it's right after sequences, if I remember properly. And so and so they're still kind of like germinating that, but for me, I'm just like, well, it's obvious, like this, like what's going on, and but yeah, and so getting them to like get, and you're right about the notation gets in the way. Mm-hmm. And I think maybe like I'm in a unique situation where I teach well, not unique, but I teach in an open enrollment institution where like some of my students come in. Open enrollment meaning like there's no audition. Any student can be a music major. Doesn't matter who you are, and which is a really great goal. But it also means that, you know, a good number of my students come in and they're like, music's cool. I want to do music. And you're like, you don't know notation yet. And so they have to start freshman year learning notation and, you know, trying to do sequences by 3 semesters after that or 2 semesters after that is just like, it's a lot of brain power to like, I have super respect for every single one of those students. Yeah. And so like the notation literally kind of gets in the way of them understanding it because it's just so imposing for some of them.
Mm-hmm. So I'm just curious, are they getting like a Bachelor of Arts in music or like a professional degree, like a Bachelor of Music in music something, or?
We have Bachelor Music Education, and we've just instituted a Bachelor of Musical Arts degree, which is
that too.
Yeah, it's my little like, that's my baby. I like made that. I was one of the people who helped make that. It's
a cool degree that's sort of hybrid. It's like half professional degree, half liberal arts degree. I like it. I think it's really neat.
I'm super into it.
So talk to us a little bit about the big project. You mentioned that when you first started implementing these things, you started with this kind of big project, and we've talked a little bit about the small scale projects, the concert reviews, the graphic scores, the pre-concert lectures. But you also mentioned in the article a kind of a larger scale project that you like to do. So talk to us a little bit about that and kind of how you scaffold that project throughout the semester so students can kind of work towards that as you're going along.
Totally, yeah. And again, I probably shouldn't mention these types of things, but it's fine. The scaffolding came from because I didn't scaffold enough the first time. So I had this beautiful idea. And
that happens to all of us.
I'm like, I got this great idea and it's going to be amazing. They're going to love it. And then I did it and I was like, wow, that, some things turned out not great. And so I realized, I think like the second semester I pulled this final project out where I guess I should say what it is in the first place, which is that students, instead of writing a final paper, the students either they can write a newspaper article, they can record a podcast, they can make a YouTube video, or actually those are the three things. Yes. Either analyzing a piece or teaching a concept, which again was a kind of like we have a lot of music education majors. I was like, I want to be able to kind of reach both those populations. And so what I in particular found was that I don't know how theory is at other places, but ours happens even before a lot of our music education students have like a formal education class. Like they don't like know how to write lesson plans. They don't know how to do a lot of things. They've got some like innate interest and skill in teaching, but in terms of like formalized practice, not so much. And so what I found after the first time was that and I'll say two big problems happened. One is that students did a lot of blow-by-blow analyses, and I had an old musicology professor used to call it like the chemistry paper approach to, the chemistry paper approach to analysis, which is just boring. Or if they're teaching, they would just skip so many steps of like where a student would be, just so many steps. They'd be like, well, okay, so we've got if you're trying to teach, I don't know, text painting, for instance, you're like, oh, well, we're going to listen to Frozen. Hey, did you notice that text painting there? You're like, you didn't explain text painting.
You didn't say what text painting is.
You didn't tell us to. You didn't tell us to listen to the words. You didn't explain what text painting was. And it's not their fault. Like it's not their fault at all. It's that you're asking them to do something that they don't have any training in doing. And so I started basically to try to mitigate this as much as possible. And my scaffolding has kind of increased as I've continued. I got the idea for this scaffolding, I think, first from Samantha Inman has a really wonderful article on actually writing on how to scaffold papers in JMTP something a couple of years ago. And so I kind of jerry-rigged that into this. So the idea is that you first propose the project, which this helps avoid students being like, I'm going to analyze all of the music. and then explain the music to people, and you're like, wait, no, you can't. You can't explain what music is to people. No, right. Let's think smaller. Which, of course, like this is a research problem, right? This is this is any research paper. The first thing that people have to learn is scope, and so we're teaching them that there. After that, I have them outline things, either outline or give some sort of a lesson plan, which in the case of lesson plans helps me give students feedback on how to make a lesson plan for at a stage where they may not have any training, but really eager to do so. Or in the case of analysis, like I'm basically teaching them how to do how to write and structure a research paper. They're just presenting it in a different way. Again, usually a scope problem too, in terms of like, I'm going to talk about like every single note in the entire piece for this long. You're like, no, I don't think so. Don't do that. Rough draft would be the third stage, and that's just to kind of like stave off if there are some, just to kind of be like, yeah, you're on the right track. Here's where usually it's just again a cutting problem, either a cutting problem or in the case of teaching, if you ever try this, is I find a lot of students try to be really funny, and the entire project just ends up being them with a comedy routine which at the end they say, and that's text painting.
That would be me in undergrad.
Oh,
for sure.
Again, I don't fault anybody on this, but I think we were talking earlier about an SNL skit, and I had students who did an SNL skit. And this was the first semester I did this, and that's basically what happened. It was just a whole bunch of like, what are those, like slap gags or something like that came out of nowhere, and then with about like 10 or 15% theory. And so the rough draft helps me fix that ratio a little bit. And then I have students like at that point. I mean, I've given them all the critique I possibly can, and so but I think it's helpful for them at that point to have peer evaluations, both because their peers oftentimes have better things to say than me because I'm a one-trick pony, and two, because I think it's good for them to see what their peers are doing.
I have found I do peer evaluation when I teach the form class and they write a paper. They read each other's papers, and I don't tell them that that's going to happen. I find it works really well when they don't know it's coming. Mm-hmm. But one of the things I've discovered is that it's almost like they're used to receiving feedback from teachers. And so sometimes it's easy for that to kind of wash over them. And they're like, well, I mean, she's always going to tell me I have to fix something. But when their peer is like, I don't know what your thesis statement is, it's a whole other ballgame. And so I think you're right. It's not just even that we don't have all the ideas. It's that sometimes hearing it from, somebody who's also writing the same paper is a really helpful thing. And it feels different to them. They can receive it differently.
Can't agree more. And I think it's just to kind of like riff on that for a hot second. I think it's not just more impactful, but it's also good for them to be able to, like, they learn things through critique in the same way that I think I've learned to be a better writer, not through writing, but I think through like dissecting the writing of people I like.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And also being edited, like it's not just the writing, but the having to go back and rewrite your own stuff and, all of those things where you realize, oh yeah, I guess that doesn't really make sense. Or I could be clearer here, or I could say less in this spot.
Correct. So, yeah. Agreed.
I did notice like the timeline of the project is really tight. So like it's all kind of towards the last couple weeks of the semester. For the big project, they do the rough draft, and then like a week later it's the next stage and the next stage. And as I was looking at that, I was like, I mean, it's really smart because they don't do it until it's assigned anyway. Like, it's not like you give them a month and they don't do it until like 3 days before that month is up anyway. So in that way, it's really smart. But I was thinking more about, have you ever felt kind of a crunch at the end there with guiding these projects? Or are you just not, is that kind of the primary homework that you're receiving from them at that stage?
I have two answers to this. One is that, like, I think I've actually felt like it's been pretty okay. Like, there's a little bit of a crunch when it comes to the only real crunch is when it comes to actually like recording things. They sometimes struggle to find the time to do that. But I think with adequate warning, I found that this to be like, hey guys, like the rest of this is probably going to take you maybe like an hour or two. Like you can kind of leisurely get through this, but just heads up, recording things is hard. And the week when you have to do your rough draft is going to be really not a fun one for you. You're probably going to have to spend like a few hours doing this. I think with enough warning, like my students tend to be okay with it. And a lot of them, especially since I let them do it in groups, a lot of them have like a ton of fun with it. They like really, really, really enjoy doing it. I think they especially like trying to get a rise out of me in a lot of cases. Like I had a student once do a project where he explained verse chorus forms through. He was a mad musicologist who came out of a Ouija board, and I'm like, what is this?
Not just a musicologist, a mad musicologist.
It was really well done. It gave a lot of Breaking Bad vibes, but it was like, but I'm convinced that he was just like, let's see how crazy, because I think they all think I'm crazy, and it's like, let's see if I can like up him. I'm like, okay. But the real crunch that I actually find when it comes to implementing this is like, it takes about like my timeline, at least that I use now, is about 5 weeks. You pass the sign-up sheet 5 weeks in, and you got a 15-week semester. And so while it's tight for the project, the real problem comes in that it can be challenging to find enough kind of upper level things for them to talk about, depending on how your curriculum is structured. And so when I first came in, I took the curriculum. I came in like so many other people, replacing somebody else. I took their curriculum and just kind of implemented it. And their curriculum was a lot of chord, which I think a lot of people do, like, and myself included. But then if you get to week 10 and you haven't done, like, no one's going to do this project and be like, I'm going to explain like the use of the subdominant to people, because that's just too much baggage. And so I think that you have to be kind of tactful about what sorts of topics you introduce before, with an idea of these are going to be topics that are good for translation. So a lot of my students, for instance, like my current curriculum, we do a lot of pop music in their we focus a ton on pop music specific techniques in that last semester. And so I have students who like can explain like a chord loop to people, or can explain verse chorus form, or can explain text painting. Like these are types of things that you don't necessarily like need to spend 10 minutes explaining what a Roman numeral is to somebody before you get to there. Or like the 12-bar blues, for instance, makes a lot of students choose that as a topic too. So I think there is like, that's, if I have to say a limitation to this type of project is that you have to think about what types of theory topics actually do translate well, because some don't.
It's very true.
Because the audience ultimately is the uninformed, right? The amateur, the public, right? That doesn't know Roman numerals or all these other things. Yeah.
No, and it's why I did this last year with the last 2 years with my fundamentals crew, like people who are like learning to read and write music for the first time. And that actually worked out really well, because actually what I ended up doing was I gave everyone kind of like, from the beginning, I'm like, here, okay, you're going to do notation, and you're going to do like simple meters, and you're going to do eighth notes or something. And like that way we could actually put on like a show for the school, and someone could walk into that like not knowing how to read or write music, and kind of walking out there being like, oh, I see the progression here, like a little mini like class on how to understand music at a basic level.
Well, you need to describe this more. I'm imagining this like Waiting for Guffman, like community theater show where you have the fundamentals class, like now up is simple meter, and you have these little song and dance, and then
you are thinking of it exactly correctly.
Okay, please invite us next year.
Yes.
This was I told you I am a little nuts, and so we actually put on a music. I called it the Music Theory Extravaganza or something. I think that's what I called it. Like the Missouri Western Music Theory Extravaganza, and that's I write this in the or I was talking about this in the CEL portion of the article, where it's like putting on. I told my students, I'm like, you're going to put on a TED Talk for people, and so what we did was we alternated fundamentals people with kind of my theory 4 students so we do like, I'm going to teach you notation. Okay, well now we're going to go and talk about like. All right, now we're going to talk about verse chorus forms. And then we go back, and now we're going to talk about like, I don't know, again, 12-bar blues. I primed myself, and now I can't think of anything else. And at that time, I actually had students. Some students had chosen. I gave them the option to do research papers, but if they wrote a research paper, they had to explain it to they had to explain their research or analysis paper to a non-specialist as part of this. And so like someone then was like, I'm going to go explain my analysis of Equilibrium, for instance. Excuse my ridiculously bad German there. But I tried to make it as like fun as possible. And it was, I think, with one big caveat, which is that don't combine 2 classes worth of things, because then it turns out that your TED Talk is like 3 hours long, and no one wants to stay for 3 hours, myself included.
I love it. The entertainment value is really important, I have to say. My classes are large. Y'all probably know this already from me talking on the podcast, but I often use caricatures while I'm teaching in the class. Like the other day, we were talking about Koji Kondo, and I had like this character Link, like with a cape and a sword and everything. Like they were so sucked into that, and it was just because they were kind of following the story, like alongside like the theme from Legend of Zelda with this little character Link, and Little Extra and Neapolitan, and it was just like, oh my goodness, I would have never like even thought to do that in a past version of myself, but like now it's like a part of my thing, like it's like a part of that talk, to do like the caricatures, and like the entertainment value is there, but also like there's this artistic depth to it that goes like right alongside with that. And I think that's important, especially when you're creating content that like, is really consumable out there, in the public, or Reddit. I think you mentioned Reddit in your article too. It's like, if you want to make something that's really going to like kind of attract a little following or really suck people in some way, there has to kind of be like, yes, high content value for sure.
No,
I think Tone talked about this too, but also like the other side of that, like that engagement, like entertainment value has to be something there.
Totally. And I think that's actually one of the harder things for students to hear when you give this kind of, when you work on, with these types of assignments, is that, especially with this final project, sometimes, I mean, some people have more of a creative spin than others. I'll admit that I'm a good critiquer of creative content, but I'm probably not very good at it. I've got nonstop dad jokes and nothing else. And so when it comes to giving critiques, I find myself, one of the bigger critiques that I have is watch your video again. Would you as a learner be really interested in this, or are you kind of just reading from a script, and are you like Night of the Living Dead and just a zombie? I think that's hard for people to grasp, and it's hard for people to hear. But again, it is a skill, and I think it's a skill that's important, as you say, not just if you're going to make podcasts, but if you're going to be a teacher, or if you're going to promote yourself or your work in any way, you need to be engaging. And that, I had to learn that. I remember when I first taught at Penn State, it was a freaking disaster, because such a disaster, because I thought I'll just be sage on stage, I think is the term, right? And I'm just going to sit there, and I'm going to deliver perfectly crisp and clear information. It's going to be great. And then it was a utter failure. And I learned from that don't do that. It turns out being yourself, and I tell this to my students all the time, you as a person is much better, will be much more engaging than you as script. All anyone wants to do is watch you, is just learn from somebody who knows something from someone else, and who's just treating you like a person, right? And you don't need to be super comedy, but you do need to be a person.
So you have these assignments, these different public music theory assignments in your classes. I'm curious to know, what is the weighting of those assignments compared to, I'm assuming there's other assignments that you have in the semester. Are they homework, other tests, quizzes, those other things? How do you balance all the different kind of assignments that you would have in a normal semester?
I think this is hard for everyone, right? It differs depending on, I think it depends on your student population too, because the amount of homework we gave at Eastman was a lot different than the amount of homework I give now, not just because of them, but because my teaching load's so much different too. But I think when it comes to these types of assignments, you can kind of see most of if people decide to read this, the assignments or the examples that I give are actual assignments that I give my students. And they're most of the time, when I'm giving, especially the preliminary assignments, they're not usually here, go do this thing. It's normally I'm going to guide you through what would, I think, be a more normal music theory assignment. Do some Roman numerals, think about, I'm looking at, for instance, this Hensel Dubis de Rue, an assignment that I have, think about the text of this. Now think about the form of the song. Now think about this particular harmonic moment, which, if we just stopped there, would be probably a pretty good theory assignment, or at least a pretty standard theory assignment at the very least. But I've always been the kind of person that, as an undergrad, I'll admit it's not my teacher. I will say this up front. It is not my teacher's fault. It's my fault. But I had a hard time understanding the why behind things. I had a hard time being okay, well, I got that 4 chord here. Now what? What's the point? And that was especially when I figured out the now what. That's when theory was this is cool. And I feel anytime I give labels, or have students label things, or have students put names to things, I always want to end that assignment with a now what, with a why. And I think what I usually do is replace that why, which I think in most theory assignments would be think about this, and write a paragraph or two on the use of mode mixture and its and how it makes you sad. I don't know. Sorry, that's a terrible assignment. But you can replace those sort of short answer questions with a public music theory component, and I think it serves that same purpose, which is that we want you to like think about things at a higher level than just kind of putting labels on the paper. And I think in doing so, it helps students get to that, like, oh, I see the point. And especially when it's more of a public music theory thing, there's a dual edge. There's the, oh, this is interesting, which is good for some students, but not every student is going to be like intrigued by that sort of thing. Maybe like, or like going to be like innately in love with that sort of thing is maybe better. I think a lot of students, I shouldn't say that. But I think just as motivating, I mean, some other students might be more motivated by the fact that like, oh, like, this is cool, but I really like the fact that I can then apply that cool thing to the rest of my life. Like, it's not just this is cool. Like, we don't have to stop there. We can then bring it over. And if I'm going to teach, I would next time I conduct this for my band, like we can actually like use this observation.
Yeah. And to know. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think I just talked too much and didn't actually answer your question, which is the actual weighting. Also a failing of mine, which is talking too much. I probably put these in maybe every 2 or 3 weeks. It would be probably a good kind of bet. It's not every assignment, because I think I do still want students to practice their writing. I do still want students, like, these take more time, and I try to be respectful of my students' time. And so whenever I do something that takes that kind of time, I try to like offset that the next week or two.
Yeah, and I like how it addresses, different literacies for students, rather than just always writing and prioritizing, the written word. We have students coming in, with all sorts of different experiences, backgrounds, and yeah, their writing might not be great, but they can communicate incredibly well verbally, right? Or visually or something like that. So being able to allow those students to apply those other literacies, I think, is a great thing to do. I would be curious to know a little bit more about the community engaged learning. So we talked a little bit about the theory variety show, but maybe from the angle of, how did you go about, finding venues outside of the classroom, or what were you thinking? Because it's often hard for faculty to kind of, especially theory folks, I think, because we don't do it's not a performance, right? If we had a choir or a band, yeah, of course, we're going to engage with the public, we're going to go to a nursing home and play, or we're going to do these different things. We're doing theory, right? And so what types of outside of the classroom environments and places did you kind of explore and find that were successful?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is probably like, I mentioned that this was a real dissatisfaction I had with this sort of with the assignment, even though I loved the way students were using like applied learning in different ways. But when we're doing these projects, but I just felt myself being very unsatisfied with, well, now what, and yeah, they could just post it to YouTube, or yeah, they could post it to the podcast, but like, it's still, then it just feels like posting something into the void, which I don't know, like anyone who's ever yelled at the Twitter void, for instance, which I of course never did. That's
what this podcast is. We're just yelling into a void.
It's the best. And I just feel, but I I would personally, I put myself in their shoes, and I'm like, I would personally find that very unsatisfying, just being like, and it's done. But it's really, as you mentioned, it's really hard to figure out, like, within the context of, a couple weeks, what can we do? So one of the things that I did, I mean, the TED Talk was my first attempt at this, was trying to get students to actually be talking to somebody. And I think that also gets at it adds motivation to them, where when they feel like, oh, I'm actually going to be like going and someone will see this other than my professor. I think they care more. Like, my students just like, they seem to really enjoy that idea. more than I thought they would. More than I thought they would. So that was my first attempt. I'm actually in talks right now with the but I found that it was with the theory TED Talk. It worked really well. I will probably do it. I will probably do it again when COVID is like when we can actually gather in places in a little bit easier of a situation. So that's been challenging. But I've been talking with another kind of way that I didn't write about, but I've been chatting with some colleagues, is that I have other colleagues throughout campus that are actually doing something similar, but in different fields. So for instance, my history colleague has his students doing the exact same thing. And we're going to try actually doing like a joint kind of TED Talk for the school as sort of like a test run. Cause I think the idea, the end goal is that basically it'll be like a round robin where classes vote on who gets to go forward into this like university-wide TED Talk. And like each class would submit maybe two things. And it would be a giant like university-wide, like demonstration of what you're doing. And admittedly, we have a Missouri mandate to be the applied learning institution in Missouri. And so this is like particularly relevant for us. But I think like that sort of idea is one thing that I'm toying with. Another one that I was toying with before, I was really mad that it didn't work out. So I was in talks with a choir friend of mine who ran a high school choir, and I was like, hey, I've got some fundamental students. Like, what if we were to like take these projects and we were to use them to tutor your students in fundamentals? Because she has to teach, or she teaches fundamentals as part of her choir. And we were going to get my students to come in and use their videos, use their scripts, and actually like teach people things. But of course, then everything got shut down, and it just hasn't happened yet. But it is like a thing that I am trying to do. I really want to get my students teaching theory in the high schools, in the middle schools, like them, because I think they're our best ambassadors. Like I know we have to, like for instance, have to recruit students. We have to like think about how to do that. And as a theory professor, have always been like, how do I recruit people? Like, I don't think anyone's coming to see me. And so like, but I think people would, if my students can be ambassadors to what you can learn at the university, and especially because if you think about what they're doing with these projects, right? They're choosing the topic. So if they choose the topic, it's something that they find interesting. If they find it interesting, someone else is probably going to find it interesting. And so I think like that's like the next step for me is to like start sending these theory ambassadors, like theory tutor, whether it be theory tutoring, whether it be actual, like we're going to take over your class for a day. We just have to be able to actually do that.
That's cool. I love that. I love that theory ambassador. And also addresses that recruiting issue, right? Because I think probably Jen and Ben both, we like we're not recruiting. No one's coming to study oral skills 1 with me, probably.
Probably not. I mean, I mean, this is what I'm saying. Like for some people, sure. Like I have a couple students who, like, every year there's always 2 or 3 students who are like, yes, I want to do theory so badly. And I go, who? Like, I mean, respect, but
yeah, I think forging those connections can help also in the other way around. Like, for example, I was talking to one of my students the other day from Grapevine, Colleyville, and they were talking about, oh, well, our music theory teacher from high school, she has like this series of YouTube videos, and I was like, oh, let me check them out. They were great, and I ended up sharing those with other students who, when I was in my office hour and I was kind of running short on time, there's so many people, and I said, you know what? Music theory lady on YouTube has a video on this specific thing. It's really good, and I had only known about that because it's kind of what you're talking about, but the other direction where it was produced by her and her high school students, then going up to some of the fundamentals in college. So, the better we can do with forging that connection, gosh, and just creating good content is so good.
No, it's true. And I got that idea actually from, we had a really wonderful and engaging admissions coordinator at a couple of years ago, who's a good friend of mine. And she had this glorious idea during, right when the lockdown started, or last fall, not when the lockdown started, but when everyone was trying to come back to school and everyone's still trying to figure out how are we learning? What are we doing? And how do we do online learning in particular? She had the idea that as an orientation, a lot of our freshmen would make videos to help out the high school and middle school teachers, and we would all take a lesson of some kind, and and they'd recreate it. It would be kind of a way to create connections and just kind of build community in the university. And I was like, this is a great idea. And I was like, well, what's the best thing? What's the best kind of video we can make? Theory video. Yes.
Always.
Exactly. And so I was like, we can do, and I think I mentioned, making a class podcast, or making a class almost video textbook, which helps both, which could be used by your local teachers, but also again, I feel like I say things. I've got my 4 or 5 ways to explain things, but my students always surprise me by having, n number of more ways to do it. I can just keep those videos, and when a student's having trouble, I'll be like, hey, here's your classmate explaining this to you in a way that's designed to be understandable. Let's use that, and then that be a tutoring, an extra tutoring power for me.
Yeah, that's great. That's awesome. Well, this has been a blast, Aaron, and I loved getting to talk with you and kind of learning more about kind of what's going on. And this is a really great projects and really inspiring ideas, I think, that you have and that you've been able to implement. So, check out his article. It's really good. What's the title of it again? Cultivating Career Skills Through Public Music Theory and Community Engagement, or Engaged Learning. There we go. But before we let you go, we do have some rapid fire questions. We promised that we'd get to those. And so
I'm scared.
These are, off the cuff, and these are the Twitter soundbite ones. All right,
great,
so
perfect.
Pithy. We're looking for pithiness here.
That's not impossible.
We have a second episode with just Aaron answering the rapid fire coming up. All right, Jenn or Ben, either of you guys want to go first?
I'm ready.
Okay, go for it.
So if you were doing your own final project, would you write an article, do a YouTube video, or make a podcast, and what would your topic be?
I think I would do I would like to do an analysis, and I'd probably do a YouTube video, because I'm not going to say a piece because I don't really have one off the top of my head that I would love, but I think there's an untapped potential for YouTube analyses of pieces that are really insightful and really thoughtful.
That's good.
Yeah,
agreed.
Good.
Ben?
Favorite topic to teach?
Mode mixture, without question. You get awesome music. And plus, I have this weird obsession with third relations, and so that's just that I don't understand it, but I absolutely adore the types of music that you can teach with mode mixture, and so it's just and I think at the end of the day, I don't really care what topic I teach. I care what piece I can bring into the classroom and obsess over that day.
Yeah.
Heck yes.
Yeah.
Same.
All right, and then mine. I'll just circle back to the very beginning of our conversation. 564 or 164 or cat 64.
Whatever they want to do that day. No, I'm just kidding. I let my students do. I mean, personally, I just think it's easier to just do either cat 64 or 564. I'm not a big fan of 164, but I do really enjoy cat 64 as a label.
Great. And so as we're kind of wrapping up, maybe let's close out just with telling us a little bit about maybe what you have going on, maybe in the future, and then where people can find you if they want to learn more about what you're up to.
Sure. Future things. I think the all-encompassing thing is a few colleagues of mine, Phil Ewell, Cora Palfi, and Rosa Abrahams, and I are all writing a textbook together That's like the all-encompassing and like project at the moment, and it's really, really fun, especially when you're like, man, what's some like cool, I don't know about you, but I spent an hour today with Rosa writing a chapter on meters, and we're just like jamming out to awesome music. Plus, you get to throw in things that are complete jokes. I think I threw in Mariah Carey, All I Want for Christmas, and I'm not sure, and I can't promise it'll stay in there, but it makes me laugh that it's in a theory textbook, and damn it, I want it there.
It belongs there.
It belongs there.
There you
I
go.
did Celine. I'm like, it's the #1 hit of all time. Come on, we can do it. So that's like my, that's where I'm most useful, is putting in stupid things into theory textbooks. If you want to get a hold of me, feel free. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. I'm not really on Instagram, but you can gladly see my one post every 3 months. Or just email me. I'm extremely on email.
So that's our show. Thank you so much for listening to Note Doctors, the Music Theory and Pedagogy podcast. We will be back with more interviews with professors and teachers who will be dropping all sorts of theory knowledge for your education, edification, and enjoyment. So until then, bye-bye.